Well, good morning, all. Thank you for being here. Um, we have what I think is a really exciting initiative around creativity. Lots of people have said they're interested, and it's interesting because they're not just creative people. They're people who are interested in the financial dimensions of creativity and how do you manage creativity. Creativity is inherently somewhat risky from a financial investment perspective, so there's some really unique but interesting issues around management. But this is an initiative in which we're trying to define creativity, identify what makes great creative. We're working with CMOs, CFOs, CEOs, agencies. We're trying to identify a lot of case studies and benchmarks. And ultimately, we hope we can come up with a model that will help companies and agencies manage the creative process. These are the team members. I won't take time to read all of the names, but I would say that there's still room for others. If you have an interest in the general topic of creativity, and by the way, we'd put innovation in that same category. The folks who do product development are also creative people. We just sometimes refer to it as innovation. But if you're at all interested, let me know, and we'd be happy to get you involved in the project. What I'd like to do with you this morning is to give you an overview of step one. Step one, we concluded, should be a literature review. There's a huge literature on creativity, and that literature spans many, many disciplines: the arts and humanities, literature, psychology, engineering, other sciences. And so we have a lot to build on. And so we've started the process of a literature review. What I'm going to do is to try to summarize for you what we, a small group of us working on the project, believe the literature says. And so if you'll bear with me for 25 minutes or so, I will tell you what we think the literature says, at which point you should feel free to completely disagree with me. That's fine. You might want to raise questions about, if we know so much, how come we can't apply it so well? Because there does seem to be a large disconnect between what we know about best practices in the management of creativity and how it actually gets managed in a lot of organizations. So let me begin by simply saying that if there's any one principle in the social sciences, if there's anything that remotely resembles a scientific law in the social sciences, it is that the message matters. The only really working element in the communications mix is the message. And unfortunately, when people talk about media budgets, they talk about working and non-working budgets. And what they typically talk about as working budgets are the media, not the message, not the creation of the message. The literature is really clear. No amount of media can compensate for an ineffective or poor message. If you have a poor, unpersuasive message, yelling louder doesn't help. Repeating it a lot doesn't help. Repeating it a lot while you shout doesn't help. And putting a lot of media weight behind it doesn't help. Messages do differ in their effectiveness, and there is evidence that stronger messages actually may require less media weight to be as effective as a weaker message. By the way, if it's a really poor message, no amount of media weight is going to compensate for that. Messages can have long-lasting effects, but only if there's a short-term or immediate effect. And many of the effects the temporal effects that you may see in advertising really reflect the fact that messages roll out across audiences over time. But the effect is typically at the individual level and is immediate with a good exposure. And there's also some evidence that the quality or finish of the message has an effect. Better delivery of a good message is what we're really talking about. So I can test a storyboard, run a storyboard, and I might have a very powerful effect. If I finish that storyboard and producing it, it's going to have a stronger effect. But that's only if the message is effective and there are diminishing returns to quality. Really, a strong message would appear to rest on two factors. First of all, what you're talking about, the product or service, in the case of a marketing message. And here there's a whole creative process around innovating the product or the service. But here we're talking really about the value proposition. What are we telling people the product is? How are we telling people the product is different from other products? What are we telling them about product characteristics? Our friends in industrial design would say that we ought to tell people either what the product does, how it does it, is it convenient, easy, or how does it make you feel while you use it, or some combination of the three. The second thing on which a strong message rests is how it's delivered. And it is possible to take a strong message and to make it a poor message by obscuring it. And you probably all remember ads you've seen with so much creative clutter you didn't realize who was actually running the ad. The message the message delivery is grounded itself in the product or service, but it's really associated with getting attention, comprehension, being memorable, differentiating the product. When we think about the role of creativity as it relates to the effectiveness of advertising or other marketing communications, what we find is a lot of the evidence is anecdotal, and it tends to focus on successes. So there are a lot of really great success stories out there, really great case studies of incredibly creative copy that had an enormous effect in the marketplace. But that's not the full picture. If we're going to look at the role of creativity, we really need to look at a 2x2 matrix. And I'm sorry, I have taught for 40 years in a business school, so I live in the world of 2x2 matrices. But we really need to think about messages in terms of whether they're creative or not creative, and then whether they're effective or not effective by some criterion. And we need to look at all four cells. And a lot of the anecdotal work tends to look primarily at creative advertising that's effective. That's fine, but we need to fill in the other three cells to really get a good understanding of the role of creativity. Of course, this brings us to the question of what is creativity? We hope that will be one outcome of this project, is to develop a little bit better definition of creativity, at least for purposes of guiding management decisions. The academic definitions tend to focus on generating something new, but they're not very consistent. You'll find definitions that focus on novelty or originality. You'll find other definitions that focus on value or appropriateness. You'll find definitions that focus on divergence and self-expression and use terms like novelty, messy, unpredictable, versus literature that talks about convergence and problem solving, using terms like practical, functional, orderly. To a large degree, these differences kind of reflect the view of creativity in the arts versus the sciences. So in the arts, there's a lot of focus on creativity as novel expression. In the sciences, the focus tends to be much more on novel ways to solve problems. So we might ask, where does marketing or management fit? Well, actually, it kind of combines the two. And then finally, you have a question that arises about whether we're talking about the individual or the organization. An individual can be creative, but so can organizations. The theories that are out there, and there are many theories, tend to reflect these differences in focus. Terms like creativity, originality, novelty, innovation are all used interchangeably. But it's also the case that what is considered creativity or creative is often, but not always, contextually and temporally bound. So something that was viewed as creative a year ago is not so creative today necessarily. And there's also a confusion in the literature between the source of the creative product and the product itself. So we can talk about an individual or an organization's creative, but you'll also hear people talking about the outcome, the creative product, the piece of art, if you will. Creativity, by the way, is relevant in all of marketing. We often think of it in the context of advertising, but it can be relevant to the product, to price and promotion, distribution, marketing communication, business models. I've actually seen some what I would consider to be very creative promotional campaigns and that have been very effective. So there are two questions that sort of are posed by this initiative. First, how to operationalize creativity in advertising or marketing more generally. Most of the literature tends to do so in terms of expert ratings, expert opinion, or consumer audience ratings, or awards for creativity, which are usually based on some sort of peer or expert judgment. But the empirical evidence does not support the use of awards or subjective judgments as really predictive of market success. There's a lot of selectivity and hindsight bias. This was a very successful campaign, and it was highly creative. We remember those, we use them in our anecdotes. Doesn't necessarily mean that it was the creativity that was driving it. And then the second question we have to address is, what are the effects of creativity and what should we be measuring? The effects you measure may vary considerably by the different purposes. So part of what we have to consider is what's the goal that we're trying to achieve. But irrespective of what goal, whether that's to gain attention, whether that's to create liking, whether that's to sell a product, regardless, there are strong, reliable, valid measures that are out there. There are good diagnostic measures, measures of awareness, of attention, of liking. There are good evaluative measures, choice, price premium, incremental revenue. There are good measures in the long term and the short term. But again, I'll repeat, all evidence demonstrates that there's no long-term effect without short-term effects. So the question that the initiative has been asked to address is the ROI, or at least the financial return on creativity. So what's the financial justification for investing in creativity? That means we've got to understand the context in which creativity is being used. So who, what, where in the organization? Is creativity being viewed as a cost? We send people off to create an ad, create a product, that's a cost. Or is it being viewed as an aid to driving revenue? Those are two very different perspectives with respect to the role of creativity. Is the creator, whoever that may be, whether it's somebody inside the marketing organization or an ad agency or someone else, are they a business partner and will be treated as a business partner? That means they have to understand the business. Or are they simply a supplier? Okay. Are they the firm that you bring in to clean house? Do you treat your ad agency as the janitor? But we also have to understand if we put ourselves in the position of the financial decision maker, creativity is but one of many financial decisions. So part of what we have to ask ourselves as we contemplate the financial return on marketing is, what are the other alternatives? The opportunity costs we heard about yesterday. So what are the alternatives? What are the alternatives for the firm as a whole? You can improve the product, increase efficiency of production. There's just a lot of things you can spend money on. What are the alternatives within the product portfolio? Do you invest in product A, product B, in market C, market D? Which markets represent the best opportunities? And then there are a whole host of marketing actions within the individual product or brand. We can improve the advertising message. We can support distribution channels. We can respond to competition. There are always other opportunities and alternatives to investing in creativity. One is to simply drop the funds to the bottom line. And when I talk to my students about investing in marketing, I tell them, if you can't do better than investing in the 3-month T-bill, which by the way, these days is above 5%, it's not bad, then you probably don't want to be spending money on marketing. So you've got a minimum here. You ought to be able to justify spending. What the financial decision maker is attempting to do, if they're doing their job, is to look across all those alternatives for spending money and search for the highest and best use of funds. So you're really talking about a financial decision maker who's having to make trade-offs. There's never, ever enough money. Investment decisions, by the way, are forward-looking. We're investing today to get some return for the future. So history, all those wonderful case studies, all those things we see in retrospect can be useful for context, but they're not very helpful for addressing the financial decision maker's decision today. Okay. It's great that the ad campaign we ran last year was really successful. Now, what do I do going forward? And finally, I think we should recognize in dealing with financial decision makers that at least in publicly traded funds, CEOs and CEOs are required to report financial results. That doesn't mean they like to do that, but that's a requirement. And CEOs and CFOs are usually compensated based on financial results. So from a marketing perspective and justifying creativity, we might make their job easier and speak to their incentives by framing our own actions, creativity, in financial terms. So we need to make a case for creativity, the financial case. We've got really highly predictive measures and models of advertising effects on financially relevant outcomes that are available. All financial decisions, by the way, not just marketing decisions, require assumptions and involve uncertainty, and so we shouldn't be embarrassed about that. Anyone who has ever sat through a capital budgeting exercise knows that there are huge numbers of assumptions that are present. And in fact, some of the best discussions are about the assumptions. Do we agree or do we not agree? What do we do if the assumption is wrong? Marketers should be completely comfortable in presenting their creative products and their media plans and their more general marketing plans with lots of assumptions, and then let people argue with them. Actually, that exercise in itself will be very, very useful. So be explicit about the assumptions, build in ways to obtain frequent feedback and make adjustments, have a plan to mitigate the unexpected, learn what does and does not work. In fact, one of the differences between what we do in marketing and capital budgeting is in marketing, we often have the ability to obtain rather immediate feedback and respond to it. If I'm building a building, I can't stop 10% way through. There's not much I can do with that investment at that point. I got to finish the building. In marketing, if I've spent 10% of my budget and it's clearly not working, I have the opportunity to come back and make an adjustment. That's an advantage that marketing has over a lot of other financial decisions. We need to learn how to play to that advantage. But what does that mean? It means that we've got to have people who understand the business, the role of marketing activities in the business, and know how to translate the marketing activities into financial projections. By the way, these also have to be people who are involved in the creative process. So what do we know about managing creativity? First of all, we know there are individual differences. Some people are more creative than others, but we can also train people to be creative. We can also train people not to be creative. MBA programs are especially good at beating creativity out of students. I can assure you of that. It is certainly the case that more creative products, certainly more creative products that are relevant, tend to result from preparation and direction. People don't just wake up at night with a great idea. They may wake up at night with a great idea after having wandered around, collected a lot of information, talked to a lot of people, and allowed that information to incubate for a while, and then suddenly there's an aha. But there's an enormous amount of preparation and direction that goes into really good creative. There are a host of contextual factors, time, direction, information, opportunities and constraints. Yes, there are constraints on creativity. Firm strategy should probably be one of those. Truth should probably be one of those. Budgets, media, their political issues. I heard an advertising creative talk about her agency has a set of words they call wow words, words to watch out for. And basically it's, if you're going to use that word, think twice about it, because it has many meanings, not all of which are what you intend. You also need to recognize that creativity, writ large, really involves risk and uncertainty management. We know that when you're managing creativity, that larger pools of ideas are more likely to produce the big idea, other things being equal, subject to diminishing returns as well. But you're more likely to get a really good idea if you generate multiple ideas. We also know that a very good practice for managing risk or use stage and gate management techniques. That is, you divide the process into stages. Early stage is a stage where you spend less. You make a decision. The next decision is whether you're going to invest more. Then you typically more on development, more on gathering information. Then you have another gate where you make another decision, and ultimately you launch in the market. It's not really good practice to simply make an all or nothing decision at the outset. And as a part of that stage engagement management is the role of testing. And here I'm talking about research in the service of creativity. Research is not intended to give a report card. In fact, too often research gets presented to creatives as a report card. You did really well or you did terrible. What really research should be is an aid to the creatives. This worked. This didn't work. This seems to be getting attention. This is not getting attention. Oh, that joke you thought was so funny, nobody gets it. So let's find something else. So the research here really should be aiding the decision maker in the generator of creativity. And finally, there's a question related to the management of creativity is where in the organization does the decision get made? It appears that over the last several decades, the decision about creative has gotten pushed further down in the organization. That's probably not a wise thing to do. And if we can take any lesson, and there are many, from the recent Bush Light exercise, which we'll hear about shortly, it's that having somebody at least 4 levels below the CEO make a decision that risks the business is probably not a good practice. So you want to ask where in the organization is the decision being made? So that's kind of what the literature would seem to suggest in terms of what we know and in terms of kind of questions at large.